Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning a beautiful Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Vihehi Bayom Hashmini. It was on the 8th day. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos Parsha Shmini, which was that year was in the 26th day of the month of ניסן, which is also the Shabbat that blessed the month of Eir, in the year Tafshin Mem Gimel, exactly 39 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the opening verse of the Torah portion where it says, Vihehi Bayom Hashmini. It was the 8th day. So Rebbe said it's known, the questions that are asked in the Chassidic, different Chassidic discourses from the Chassidic Rebbeim. And the question is, why is it called the 8th day? And like the Klei Yakar says, the reason why it's called the 8th day, because it's the Yom HaShmini Limiluyim. It's the 8th day of the installation of the priests in the temple. So Rebbe asks a simple question. The fact is, we know that the installation of the priests in the temple took only 7 days. Like the verse says clearly in the previous Torah portion, Shivas Yamin Yamalias Yadchem. For 7 days, the installation process is going to take place. So what's this whole idea of the 8th day of installation? There's only 7 days. Where did the 8th day of installation come into play here? So the Klei Yakar, a commentary, explains that the reason why it's called Bayom Hashmini, what's not so powerful about the 8th day, because on the 8th day was the Gilui HaShchina. That's when Hashem revealed himself. And as the verse says clearly in reference to that day, that V'yeira Aleichem Kvoid Hashem, that on this 8th day Hashem is going to reveal himself. And like Rashi says, Vayevarech Oisam Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu blessed them, and he said, Yehi Ratzon should be the will of Hashem, Shetishre Shechina b'Maaseh Yadeichem, that the Shechina, the divine presence, should rest in the work of your hands. V'yinoyam Hashem Aleikeinu Aleinu, and he blessed him that the presence and the sweetness of Hashem should be over you. And matter of fact, this is what it says in the verse clearly, that in that day was Vayera Kvoid Hashem al Kol Ha'am, the honor of Hashem was revealed to the whole people. Vateitzei Eish Milfnei Hashem, a fire came out from Hashem. So you see, there was very, very powerful revelations that took place on the 8th day. So Rebbe takes the question even deeper, and he says, if that's the case, what was unique about that day that God revealed himself? And that's why in that day, on the 8th day, did God reveal himself? The fact is, it was 7 days of installation of the priest. It could have been on the 1st day, the 2nd day, the 3rd day, the 4th day, fine, the 7th day, the last day, but what does the 8th day have to do with it? So the Klei Yakar says, because, you know why it was on that day? Because that was the 8th day. It was Yom HaShmini. And Shmini is a very, very holy number. So in other words, to recap, what's the Rebbe explaining, based on the Klei Yakar, that what was the special thing about the 8th day? It wasn't technically the day of installation, because there was only 7 days. But the 8th was a holy day. And because it was a holy day, therefore Hashem revealed himself, and he gave a lot of blessings in that day. So now the real question is, what's this powerful 8th day? So Rebbe is going to explain it based what it's explained in a responsa of a great rabbi called the Rashba, and it's a famous teaching of his, and he says as follows, that there are holidays that are 7 days, and then there are ones that are 8 days. Why there are some that are 7 and one that there are 8? Because 7 represents a complete circle, and 8 represents something which goes around the complete circle. So 7 is the complete circle, and 8 is the number that goes around the circle. Now, even though 7 is a complete number, it's a complete circle, and it totally encompasses it. Like it's called Shivas Yemei Binyan, the 7 days of building. Just like, for example, we had the 7 days of dedication of the temple. But nevertheless, even though it's complete, you need something to watch it. And that's what 8 does. 8 watches the complete circle. So you have 7, which is the complete circle, 100% complete, nothing lacking. You don't need anything more to make it complete. But then you need the 8 that watches over it. Now, since the 8 that's watching over the 7 So it brings out 2 points about 8. Number one is, obviously, it's higher than the completion. How can I watch it if it's not higher? So point number one is that it's higher. But on the other hand, point number two is, it's not aloof and disconnected, but it has a connection. That's why you can watch it. So 7, again, is the complete circle. 8 watches a circle, which means it's higher than it, but still connected to it. In other words, what does that mean practically? So the number 7 represents world. And world which is complete. Because we know the world was created in the 7 days of building. The Hashem created the world in 6 days, He rested in the 7, so it was a full process of 7 days of creation. And it happens specifically with the number 7, because the number 7 is a complete number. And this number 7 that started from creation, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, it repeats itself every single week over and over again, the complete number of 7. And because it's complete, so what happens when you finish a 7? You don't say, okay, it's the 8th day of creation. No, you finish the complete cycle. Now we start again, and that's why every week we have a Sunday and we have a Monday, because every single week we finish the process on Shabbat and we start again on Sunday. But also to remember that 7 is a complete number, and because we know the world is created complete. As the expression is, Olam al miluya nivra, the world was created complete with the cycle of 7. So what's the profound idea of 8? Because 8 represents, it's already above nature. It's above the level of the world, and it's above the level that we're saying that the world was created complete. So 7 is complete. 8 is above the world, above the level of completion. But nevertheless, even though it's above it, as we mentioned before, that's one component. But nevertheless, it's still connected to it. In other words, what do I mean it's connected to it? It has an impact on the 7 days of creation. So that the 7 days will have more of a completion. Because you can be complete, and you can have more of completion. Like the expression is, if good is good, better is not better. So 7 is good, it's great, it's a full circle. 8 is above nature, and 8, on one hand, it's above nature, but it also completes and allows nature to become stronger. So because, again, we just learned, based on the Rashba that says that 7 is a complete number, 8 is above nature, but connected to nature. So that's why on 8, which is above nature, that's when Hashem reveals Himself. Why? Because this that Hashem is revealing Himself, it's revealing Himself to a higher level of the Shomer Hekef, the part that encircles and hovers over the creation, which creates more of a completion in the world. In other words, you have the world, you have nature, you have the regular process, and the revelation on the 8th day builds and adds another whole dimension to the regular 7 days of creation. So that is based on the Rashba. So the Rashba's saying is that 7 is nature, 8 is above nature, and based on this, the Rebbe explains that's why the revelation took place on the 8th day. That's one insight. Now the Rebbe says we're going to understand it even deeper, the quality of 8 based on what Rashi says. Rashi says, in the Rashi in Parsha Shmini, he says like this: what was so unique about the 8th day? So Rashi says that on that day there were 10 crowns that were taken on Yom HaShmini, on this special day, not necessarily that day, but throughout history. And Rashi says all the different ones are listed in a commentary called Seder Olam, and it's brought down in the commentaries all the different things that happened on Yom HaShmini. So in other words, what happened by Yom HaShmini? What's so special about Yom HaShmini? Because Yom HaShmini, there's something in the energy of Yom HaShmini that 10 crowns were given on that day. And it's not just something happened, it was actually a crown. In other words, something very, very special and something very, very unique. So that's what Rashi says. So again, so we have the Rashba that says that it's 8, which is above nature, and we have Rashi that brings down, not a contradiction, 2 different points, that 10 crowns were that were given on that day. Now, so since what happened on this day, you have the idea of the 10, which represents the 10 crowns, was on that day, and when did it happen? On the Yom HaShmini, the 8th day of completion of the finishing the installation process of the temple. So in other words, so this day in itself has also the energy of the 10 crowns. So that's why we understand, based on Rashi, why the Gilei Shechina was in this day. So we have two reasons for the Gilei Shechina. One is because its aid is above nature, Shomer is a hekef, and the second reason is because on that day there were 10 crowns. Okay, so basically that is the reason what's connected to the idea of Yom HaShmini. So now the Rebbe is going to go into this and explain it more Kabbalistically, more deeper. In other words, he's going to explain these three components. What are the three components? One is the 7 days of installation, which is the 7th day, which represents the 7 days of completion of the world. The 8th day of installation when Hashem revealed himself. And also the component that on that day there were 10 crowns. So we have 7, 8, 9, 3 powerful numbers. The 7 days of installation, 7 days of creation of the world, the 8th day where Hashem revealed himself above nature, and then the idea of the 10 crowns. So the Rebbe says we're going to understand this based on what it's brought down, and it says, in reference to the kinnor, the violin of the temple. So it says over there that you also have 3 components to the violin of the temple. You have the violin the way it's, so to speak, in this world, and when times when the temple existed. So then it had 7 strands, seven strings it had to it. That's in terms of in this world 7. When in the days of Mashiach, it's going to have 8 strings. And the kinnor of when Mashiach comes, it's going to have 10. As the verse says in the prophets, Ala Yasser, it's going to have 10. So you see that there's 3 components to the violin of the temple. One of 7 strands, one of 8, and one of 10. And they're all associated with the temple, with the Beis HaMikdash. What is the Beis HaMikdash in its completion? So it's not something which is the Beis HaMikdash. It wasn't out in the mountains and disconnected from the world. The Beis HaMikdash had a real connection to the physical world, and the world that was built in a complete way. And that's why Rebbe explains something very powerful. What's the violin in Hebrew called? It's called a kinnor. Kinnor comes from the word. Kinnor is made up of 4 letters. What are the 4 letters? Chaf, Nun, Vav, and Reish. So you have, in those 4 letters, you have the word ner, candle, and you also have the 2 letters, chaf and vav, which numerically equal 26. So you have chav vav, 26, and then you also have ner, a candle. Now we know that chav vav is the numerical value for the infinite name of Hashem. Yud ke vav ke, Yud is 10, Hey is 5, Vav is 6, and Hey is 5, so you have 26. So Chav Vav, 26 is the numerical value for Yud Kei Vav Kei. So on one hand, we're talking about Yud Kei Vav Kei, the infinite name of Hashem. But it's not out there, it's in a way that Ner brings light to our lives. And that's represented, we say the world was created in a complete state. In other words, on one hand, we know if you look in the beginning of creation, so it says how many times Shem Elokim? It says 32 times Shem Elokim. Because the world was created with Shem Elokim. But on the other hand, we know that the world was also created from Yud Kei Vav Kei, from a higher part of Hashem. As it says in the verse, this is the Eila Toidos Shemayim V'Aretz. This is the birth of the heaven and the earth. Vihi Baram, when it was created. And it says, B'yoim Asayis Hashem, it uses the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Eretz HaShemayim. So you see that the world, even though it was created from Shem Elokim, was also created from Yud Kei Vav Kei. It has the energy of Yud Kei Vav Kei in the world as well. And in the Beis HaMikdash itself, so over there we had the revelation of Yud Kei in a way of a candle. What does that mean? That the Yud Kei Vav Kei that was used to create the world, in the Beis HaMikdash, it's giving off light to the whole world. The Yud Kei Vav Kei through the candle, which represents the idea that the Beis HaMikdash gives off light to the whole world. As we know that from the Beis HaMikdash, light went out to the whole world. And therefore the Beis HaMikdash, the kinnor, the violin was made up of 7 strands. Why 7? Because that represents completion in the physical world. So again, what the Rebbe is saying is like this. The number 7 is associated with nature, and in the Beis HaMikdash is also associated with nature. And kinnor means that it had the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the infinite part of Hashem, which is used to create the complete world, was in the base of Mikdash, and from there the light went out to the whole world. And that's the completion of the number connected to number 7. But what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? Then you're going to have the Shomer Hekef. You're going to have the number 8. And that's what we're going to have in days of Mashiach. It's going to have 8 strands. And afterwards, even higher than that, when Lasid Lava, it's going to have 10 strands. Now, this is all heavy Kabbalistic stuff, but it's always important to say practically, what does this mean? And in Kabbalah, it's called Ba'avodas Adam. What does it mean practically, me serving Hashem? 7 strands, 8 strands, 10 strands, in nature, above nature, even super above nature. What does it mean practically? So Rebbe explains as follows. And he brings, based on what it says in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, that in every single nefesh, every single soul, there's 10 spheros. And, which the 10 spheres that we all have come from obviously the 10 spheres on high. That's where it comes from. Everything comes from on high, comes down to this world. And they're divided up, the 10 spheres that we have is divided up into 2 parts. The 3, which we call parents, Chachma Bina Das, the intellect, and then you have the 7 emotions. So every single soul has 10 spheroids, the 3 intellect, and the 7 emotions. What's the 7 emotions? The 7 days of creation. Now, why is what now? And it's called 7 days of binyan, building. Why is that? Because our main spiritual work in this world is the 7 days of creation, which is referring to our main spiritual work is working on our midos, our character traits. Our character, transforming our character trait, that's our work. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzachot, Yesod, Malchus, transforming us into being better people from an emotional perspective. And like it's explained many, many places, that the connection of why our avodah today is only and specifically in our emotions, that it says when Hashem gave us the land of Israel, so the obligation was to chase out only 7 of the nations. And when do we have to do it? Even now, before Mashiach comes. Why is that? Because now our main spiritual work is our midos. That's how we work on our 7 emotions. And on a global level, we have to chase out the 7 nations from the land of Israel, which means transforming the 7 emotions. However, it says when Mashiach comes, we're going to even able to eradicate the other 3 lands, which are represented by the 3 intellectual components. And as the verse says clearly, Ki yarchiv Hashem alekecha skolcha, and Hashem is going to expand the boundaries of Israel, which is referring to, we're going to conquer the 3 nations of Keni, Knizi, Kadmoini, which represents the idea of Chabad. So in other words, so you see the connection that just like in this world, they avoid us the 7 days of the week. The avoid is to bring the light into the physical world. It's referring to our emotions. And just like we see that in reference to the land of Israel, the avoid was to take out the 7 nations which represented transforming every one of our emotions. Now, the Rebbe says, we know it's brought down and it's explained based on the verse that it says in the Torah. So it says like this, Hanistorois la Hashem Elokeinu. The things that are concealed is for Hashem Elokeinu. The haniglois, the things that are revealed, is lanu levaneinu. That's what simple verse what says in the Torah. So the Rebbe is going to explain it on a spiritual level. So it said, the verse says vehaniglois. Now the shirish of the word is what's revealed, but it says vehaniglois. The 2 letters in the beginning of revealed is vav and a hey. What does vehaniglois mean on a spiritual level? So we know that vav is referring to the 6 midos, chesed, gvur, tiferes, and Netzachot and Yesod. That's the Vav. The Hey is representing what? Malchus. So Vav Hey represents the 7 emotions. 6 midos from Malchus, you have the 7 emotions. So the Vav Hey globally is referring to the midos or emotions. So the Rebbe explains, what is Vihan Niglois? Vav Hey is again the midos. That's Niglois. That's revealed to every single person. That's revealed to every one of us. What does that mean? It's revealed to us because every single person has the power and the ability to work on their emotions. Everyone has the power to transform our emotions. That's our emotions, based on V'haniglois lanu. On the other hand, Hanistara is the things that are hidden. What is the things that are hidden? Which is our intellect. In other words, meditating and knowing Hashem And that's unique to every single person. Because when it comes to emotions, we all have to behave appropriately. And we could behave appropriately. When it comes to intellectual capabilities, true, we have to meditate and study, but everyone thinks differently. Everyone understands things differently. Everyone comprehends things differently. It takes some people longer, shorter, etc. So that Hanishtara is the secret part of ourselves, which is referring to our intellect. That's Lashem Elokeinu. It means every single person has their unique avodah to transform their intellect, which obviously is not necessarily so easy. So Rebbe says, 1 second. What does it say in the verse? It says in the verse, Hanistarois, again, which is referring to our intellect, that's La Hashem Elokeinu, which means La Hashem Elokeinu. It's not our avodah, it's not our work. V'haniglois lanu, what's our work? Our emotions. But the verse says clearly that what? The Hanistarois is for Hashem. But the fact is, what did we just explain? That the Hanistarois, which means the ones that are the secret, which is referring to our intellect, that we're all different. So what we're saying is that we have to do that spiritual work, but everyone is unique. So what is it? On one hand, we're saying Haniglos, we all agree, the emotions, that's Lalam, we have to transform ourselves. Hanistarois, our intellect, on one hand, we're saying is everyone's unique. But on the other hand, what does the verse say? It's Hashem Elokeinu. It's not our avodah. It's the avodah for Hashem. So which one is correct? Rebbe says as follows. Even though it's true, Hanistaris Hashem Elokeinu, transforming our intellect, that's not for us. That is something which we, whatever the brains Hashem gave us, whatever we're able to comprehend, that's a gift from Hashem. And when is that going to happen? Like we learned before, that's going to happen when Mashiach comes. When Hashem is going to expand the boundaries and He's going to allow us the ability to transform our intellect. And today, that's not our avodah. Our avodah is today to work on our emotions. So, on the other hand, what we're saying is that everyone is unique, everyone's different. So we know the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, and he says like this. All the great revelations that's going to happen when Mashiach comes is dependent on our actions and work in this world. So even though, yes, ultimately, transformation of our intellect's not going to happen until Mashiach comes. That's when Hashem is going to expound the boundaries physically of the land of Israel, the 3, which is referring to our intellect. But when is that going to happen? Mashiach comes. So, but on the other hand, in order for that to happen, Mashiach comes, we have to do our avodah now. So therefore, even the conquering of the 3 nations of Keni, Knizi, Kadmoni, which is basically going to happen Mashiach comes, but it's still dependent on our work today. So in other words, we do have to have some kind of working to try to transform our intellect. Just like when it comes to expanding the borders of the land of Israel, literally, even though technically the conquering is going to be when Mashiach comes, but the fact is, even though it's not going to happen until later, when Hashem made the bond with Avraham Avinu in the Bris Bein Absarim, so the fact is He gave him the bond on the whole land of Israel, not only the 7 nations, on all 10. Technically, we didn't conquer it now, those 3. But we do have some kind of connection to it. So the same thing also in reference to our spiritual work, we do have some kind of responsibility to work on trying to transform our intellect, even though we're not going to be able to totally, fully transform it until Mashiach comes. Now, so in other words, to recap, what the Rebbe is saying is like this. The avodah today is to transform our emotions, and that we could do and we should do. The avodah of transforming the intellect, that's going to be Mashiach comes. But we still have to do some part because everything in the future is dependent on our avodah today. Now, even though the full transformation of our intellect is not really something for today, the only part is because it's a preparation for when Mashiach comes. But the Rebbe says the truth is there is an avodah. There is some spiritual work to work with the intellect today as well. What does that mean? It explains as follows. What did we just learn? What's the main avodah today? The main spiritual work today is our emotions. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzachod, Yesod, Malchus, transform our emotions, to behave the way we're supposed to emotionally. Now, as it says, V'haniglois lanu levanenu, V'haniglois vav and hey is referring to vav as the 6 midos and hey is Malchus, the emotions, that's what we have to do today. But in order for our emotions to be complete today, to transform our emotions, the fact is, we're intellectual human beings. The biggest gift we have is our brains. So even though we cannot transform our intellect, but the intellect has to agree and has to have a commitment and has to make a decision that we want to transform our emotions. In other words, in reality, it happens through the emotions. That's what we're transforming. But the intellect has to be on board as well. In other words, just like when it comes to transforming our emotions, everyone's equal. Everyone could behave. Everyone could be nice. Everyone could be kind. Everyone could be gentle, generous, etc. But the same thing also when it comes to the resolution, the intellectual resolution. In Hebrew, it's called the maskana. The intellectual resolution, everyone's equal as well. We can all agree to disagree, which means even though you're not holding intellectually, you don't see why you should be nice, you should be kind, etc., but you can still intellectually, you know what, I'm agreeing to be nice. In other words, when it comes to the meditating on depths and reason, understanding, and standing Hashem, etc., everyone is different. Everyone according to their level. But when it comes to the maskana, coming up with a saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to behave. I'm going to go ahead and do all the mitzvahs. And not only that, I'm going to do the mitzvah. I'm going to do Hashem's commandments. But I'm not going to do it by rote, just checking off the list. But I'm going to do it with tremendous energy and tremendous excitement that everyone could be on the same page. To agree that we're going to transform ourselves 100%, that everyone could do. So in other words, what you see from here so far, there's three levels. On one hand, ultimately transforming the intellect, Mashiach comes. In order for that to happen, yeah, we can do things today because that will ultimately give it to us. But more important, the Rebbe says, no, there is a part of our intellect that we all could establish, and that is the intellectual resolution that we should transform ourselves. Now, these three numbers of 7 and 8 and 10 on a practical level, what does that mean practically? The Rebbe says like this. The 7 is referring to the 7 days of creation of the world, which is the full circle that's working on our emotions. The 8, which we said that hovers over, that watches the completion. That is the part of our intellect that comes to the resolution that we're going to transform ourselves emotionally. And just like even though the 7 is complete, but what is the ultimate completion of the 7 is when you have the 8 that protects it. So the same thing also with the emotions. That if you want the emotions to behave and do what it's supposed to, that's when you have the 8 that protects it, which means the intellect is agreeing that this is something we should do. And the number 10 represents the ultimate transformation of our intellect, and that's going to happen when Mashiach comes, just like what we're going to have Keni Knisha Kamoni when Mashiach comes. Now, these three components in terms of this in the spheroids. So the 7 represents the 7 days, full days of completion of creation of the world, and so 7 represents the emotions. Chesed Gurd Feres Netz Chod Yisod Malchus. Number 8 represents which sphera? It represents the idea of Bina. And Bina we know is called Eim Habanim, the mother, so to speak, of the Midos. That because the Bina is the one that produces the Midos. And so what's the idea of number 10? So number 10, the Rebbe says, this is that when Bina has within it the 3 together of Chacham Bina Das. So again, just to recap, 7 is the 7 emotions, 8 is represented by Bina, and number 10 is when Bina has within it all the three intellect, and obviously, and that creates the emotions. And that's what the Rebbe says, that's why this is number 10 is what you have in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. Why? Because in the Holy of Holies, you have all 3 spheroids the way it's within Bina. And like the Rebbe is based on the known ruling which is brought down in Chassidus, that if you have a general principle that has within it multiple components, so for example, if Bina has within it Chachma and Das, so obviously because it's one that has within it others, it's higher than Chachma, Bina, and Das put together. In other words, so you see that on one hand, Bina is one of the spheres, 100%. But on the other hand, Bina has something which is higher than everything, because it has within it the other ones. It's Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies. And it's compared to the other ones because it has all 3 levels of intellect. Now, this powerful revelation that took place by Yom HaShmini, again, the intellect that agrees to transform ourselves, and also as we mentioned before, the Rashba, the Shemers HaHekef, and also the Aser Torahs. Who's the one that brought to us the revelation of the 8th day? It happened through Moshe Rabbeinu, as the Torah says clearly. And as Moshe Rabbeinu said, it should be the will of Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that drew down the energy, the gift of Hashem, the Shekhinah of Hashem to us. In other words, besides the fact, we know that in the 7 days of installation, Moshe Rabbeinu acted as a priest. Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't a priest, but he acted as a priest in the 7 days of installation. And there was Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the one that acted as a priest. But even on the 8th day, what the one that did the work came from Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's the one that affected an Aaron HaKohen, and he taught him how to bring up the Ketores, the incense, like it's brought down in many, many Chassidic places. So we see again clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that worked in the 7 days of installation, but more importantly, in reference to our conversation, Moshe is the one that through him we have the powerful gift of the 8th day and all the blessings. The Rebbe asked a simple question. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu is known, he's connected to number 7. And like it says in the Medrash, that all the 7 are beloved by Hashem. And who was the 7th? Moshe Rabbeinu was the 7th. So what does Moshe have to do with 8? Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to 7. What does he do with 8? And like especially we learned in the Chassidic Discourse from Yud Shvat, where it says over there that Moshe is the 7th, a 7th generation, and we know that the 7th is all beloved, and he is the one that brought the Shekhinah down to this world. And he brought the Shekhinah down into the world by building the Mishkan, which was made from 13 or 15 items, materialistic items, to make it a vessel for godliness. And literally up to the point where he made the Mishkan from the crushing, from the planks, which we know is the same letters as Sheker. It means he transformed the falsehood of the world for a keresh from the Mishkan. In other words, he was able to transform through playing with the words, the falsehood of the world, so it should be actually a beam for the Mishkan, for the dwelling place for Hashem. And as his whole purpose was to make a dir b'tachtonin, Hashem should dwell down here. And that's connected to what the idea of 7. And Moshe was the 7th. But on the other hand, we're saying he was 8. And the Rebbe explains very simple. And the truth is, even though Moshe Rabbeinu is very, very strongly connected to 7, and that's how he brought down Hashem's dwelling place into the world, but he also has the quality of 8. And that's why it says in the Zohar, in reference to Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Hashem says Moshe Moshe. So there's no gap between Moshe and Moshe. There's no gap. It's one after the other. Why is that? Because the ultimate in creation of the world, B'yoim Asayis Hashem, when Yud Kei Vav Kei made the world. So when Hashem made the world, so we know the Yud Kei Vav Kei, there's Yud Kei Vav Kei, a high level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and there's a lower level. And Hashem made the world with Yud Kei Vav Kei of a lower level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is connected to what? The idea of the number 7, which is basically the completion of the world. And there is a gap. And there's a gap between Yud Kei Vav Kei of down here and Yud Kei Vav Kei up there. So when it comes to Yud Kei Vav Kei, when creation of the world, there's Yud Kei Vav Kei on high, Yud Kei Vav Kei below, and there's a gap in between. However, when it comes to Moshe, there's no gap in between. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu down in this world, he was connected to the same way he was on the higher worlds. And matter of fact, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu is called Moshe. Why is he called Moshe Rabbeinu? The Torah tells us, Ki min mayim ishisiyu, he is drawn out from water, and mayim we know is referring to Chachma, the idea of Moichin. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to bring down Moichin into this world. And to take it a step further, it says, like it's known the explanation, which is brought down. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu was drawn from the water. So why was he? So one reason we explain is because that's represented by Moichin. But there's another insight that says because he was drawn from the water because Mayim, the word water, is referring to a very, very high spiritual world, and the name of that world is called Mayim. So Moshe Rabbeinu is connected to the highest levels. And that's the real quality and the power of Moshe Rabbeinu. That even though he was 7, but he was also connected to the higher of 7. There was no gap, and he was connected to the level of Mayim. And he's connected to the 7 and also the part above nature, which watches over nature. And up until we know that it says in Chazal that Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 names. 10 names he had. But what's the name that the Torah calls him? They're called Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because he was drawn out from Mayim, which is either Chachma or the level of Mayim. Because Moshe Rabbeinu's main quality was that he was drawn from Mayim, from Moichin, and he was able to bring that down to this world. And so, in other words, but it wasn't disconnected, because the fact is, even though he was, on one hand, he was the seventh, which means he was a continuation of all the generations. How do you become seven? You need to have first generation, second, third. So he was a continuation of everything. And up until the Medrash, we know it says that they told Moshe Rabbeinu, don't stand in the place of Avram Avinu. We have to remember, Avram came first, and he's Mesiras Nefesh, etc. So on one hand, he's connected to all seven, and he comes after the seven. But nevertheless, besides that, he also had the component that he was above it. And because he was above it, therefore he was able to impact Aaron. And he was able to impact to bringing down the Shechina, the dwelling of Hashem, into this world on the 8th day of Miluyim. So you see, Moshe Rabbeinu, on one hand, again, he was seven, and he was connected to the first seven, but he was also the idea of 8, and he was able to bring down the Shechina down to this world. So Rebbe finishes off and he says, it should be the will of Hashem, by learning these components in Torah, about above nature, and about transforming our emotions, and the intellect should agree to it. And we're learning it in the Torah of the Chabad rabbis. It'll be that what it says, as it says in the prophets, the Shalma Parim Sivasenu. How do we bring the sacrifices today? We don't sacrifice today, but by praying, by learning Torah. And literally, when we're gonna with our mouths, it's gonna bring to the revelation of literally the temple. We're gonna be able to bring back sacrifices in the temple. When we build a third temple, and then we're gonna have the violin, the kinnor of 8 strands, and then of 10 strands. It's gonna happen bimheira v'yameinu mamash, very, very soon, and very, very quickly, and very, very literally in our times. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us for our Chassidus class, and let's hope, as Rebbe says, our next class will be in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, with the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. Have a great and blessed week.